Deborah, and today we are going to do a blunt cut on Deborah, and then we're also going to add some long layers. So for my blunt cut, I am going to start with the middle part. Reason being is, if I part her on either side, like she may do every day, if I part her on either side, if she's just getting a blunt cut and I flip it to the other side, you're going to see longer pieces hanging down from here. And I'll show you what I mean a little bit more into the haircut. So for my blunt cut, I am going to start, she has a little bit finer hair, so I like to use the small part of my comb just so that I can be really accurate when I'm pulling the hair down. I'm going to start with parting her front sections out. When you go to part the hair, if you bring your finger to below the ear, your comb will automatically go right to your finger. So I'm going to start by, like I said, sectioning the front sections out, get them out of my way, make sure I'm starting with really clean sections. And then for Deborah today, she just wants a little trim off of the bottom. So we're going to start with a nice clean blunt cut on the bottom, and then after I'm going to add some layers for her. So when I have guests come in that want just to trim off the bottom, say they're growing their hair out, and they want to keep it long but just get off those little ends, I'm just going to do a very slight trim. You never have to do a big cut if you feel like their hair doesn't need it, if they're just here for a trim. I would probably cut off that much if she's just here for a trim, because Deborah right now told me that she's growing her hair out and she just wants to clean up the edges, get the dead ends off, and she's coming to me every 6 weeks. So I know that her hair is growing 1/4 to 1/2 inch on average a month, and I want to keep that growing process going. So I'm just going to, like I said, cut off a very small amount. Now, if she wanted a bigger cleanup, say she'd spend 6 months since she's come to get her hair cut, her hair grows really fast and she wants to get a bigger cleanup, I might give her, like just get those nice dead ends off, depending on what your client requests or your guest requests. So I'm going to start with my base, very clean part. I'm just going to give her a slight trim here. I'm just going to bring down the hair, put a nice trim. There's my guide. Start with my next section, bring down my next section, follow my guide, my last section. You may want to take more sections depending on the thickness of your guest's hair, but Deborah has pretty thin hair today, so I just was able to do it in 3 sections. Bring it down. It doesn't look like I have anything else to cut, but I'm just going to go over it, make sure I get all those little hairs that might be sticking out. See, those little hairs, I want to grab those. All right, so now I've cut my back, and I'm going to move on to my sides. So I'm just slightly cutting just a slight cut here. It's okay to see with the blonde hair. And then my last section on this side, bring down and trim that. Go to my other section. Following my guide. Doesn't look like there's much to cut here, but I'm just gonna go over it, make sure I get everything for Deborah so that she doesn't go home and find a long piece in there. Okay, so now that I'm done with my initial cut, I'm gonna check a few things. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to make sure her front is even. So when I pull down, because she's got pretty blunt hair both across, I'm gonna pull down the front and make sure that the two sides match each other. What I'm going to run into is a little V in the front. And that's because just the way that I held the hair. See that teeny little V? You just want to cut that off ever so slightly, because they're not gonna wear their hair down in their face all the time. They're gonna push it off to the side. So you still want it to look nice and blunt with the sides. But what happens sometimes is the way I directed the hair back, when you bring the hair forward, you're going to have like a teeny little point there. That's okay to cut that off. It's not going to make the hair look even in the haircut, but you don't want them to go home with little points in the front of their shoulders. So I know this hair is going to fall in the front of her shoulders, and when she gets home, if I don't cut that off, she's going to have two little points coming in the front of their her haircut, and it's going to look like you maybe went shorter in the back and longer in the front. I don't want her to go home and see that. So I'm just going to get rid of those two little points. And here's the other one on this side. Just ever so slightly. Okay, you're not cutting a lot off. What's going to happen is if you cut a lot off of that point, is you're going to bring this section up here, and now you have a shorter section in front, and then you have your length down here. You don't want that to happen, because if she wants blunt all the way around, now you've got shorter pieces in the front. And then what do you do? Then you might want to create like a little face frame for her. But you want to make sure, only do that if she wants a face frame. The next step I'm going to do in this blunt cut is I am going to have her tip her chin to her chest. And the reason I'm going to do that, when they look down, depending on how you hold the hair, depending on how you combed out the hair, depending on all of that, you may have little hairs that fall beneath the length of the hair. I see this a lot in people's haircuts when they're looking down at their phones. If they have like a pretty blunt cut, I actually do this in all my haircuts. If they have layers, if they have a blunt cut, if they've got a bob or an inverted bob, short, long hair, whatever, you want to make sure you get rid of these little hairs, and you can see them right here. See those tiny little hairs that are falling beneath the original guide of your hair. Let me show you again. So there is your length. There's those little hairs falling beneath it. You want to get rid of those. This is going to ensure that your haircut looks super clean. This is not getting rid of any length. It's just getting those little hairs that might pop out or peek out when they're looking down at something, looking down at their phone, looking down, you know, at whatever. And you can kind of see them a little bit over here. Again, it's not going to affect the length of their hair. So you can always tell your guests, I'm gonna have you look down. I'm not cutting any more length off. I just wanna get these little hairs so So every which way you look, your haircut's going to look totally even. Okay, once I've gotten those last hairs, the last thing I would do is I started her blunt cut in the middle. Now I'm gonna part it to each side just to make sure I don't have overlaying hair that's falling longer than what I want it to fall. So I'm gonna start on this side, give her a little side part, because Denver usually wears her hair to the side. So if she wears it to this side usually, I wanna make sure that when she parts it to this side, that all those little hairs hanging below, and these are just loose hairs in the cut. There's no hair that's really hanging below my guide. But I just want to part it to each side to make sure, because if they go home and they flip their hair and you haven't done this step, or say you have cut them from their part here and you haven't flipped them over to the other side, when they do flip their hair, if they flip their hair, they're going to see pieces of hair that just hang below here. It's not going to be a lot, but it's going to be enough for them to notice. So you want to make sure that when you're doing your blunt cut, you're checking every angle of the cut, making sure that wherever they wear their hair, whatever they do to their hair, they're going to have a nice, even base to their haircut. So I'm going to check this side. Maybe a little bit here. Okay. And then she was pretty good over there. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to repart her in the center, and then I'm just going to bring the two sides in to each other to make sure they look even. And then after I dry it, I'm going to see how she likes the length. If she wants to go a little shorter, hair always bounces up when it dries. So if she wants to go a little shorter, I would probably wait to dry it until I see where it's laying on her. If she really wants to go a little shorter, I would probably do the initial cut wet and then dry it and see if she likes it and still wants to go even shorter than that. So I'm just going to bring her hair forward here, make sure we've got two even sides. She's shedding a lot. Make sure we've got two even sides. Maybe this side's a little bit longer still. I'm just going to cut into that side a little bit. She's nice and even. Perfect. And that is how you do a blunt cut. Now Deborah wanted me to add some layers in. So I'm going to add some layers in. I just did her initial cut on the bottom. And now I'm just going to add some layering into her cut. How I'm going to do that, she just wants to do long layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again start by parting her sides out and leaving that to, I'm going to work on the back, create my initial layers on the back, and then I'm going to go up to the front. Okay. So I want to create a guide in my haircut that I can follow through the whole haircut when I'm doing these layers. And my guide's going to start right at the crown of the head. So I'm just going to take this section and create my guide. You can either point cut into this guide, or you can do it nice and straight across. I'm going to do it nice and straight across because you can see how she has like a little mountain here. I want to cut all that off. Plus, I want her to have a more her ends look a little bit, thin to me. So I want to make sure that I'm getting all that thinness off, giving her a really nice clean haircut. You can also measure where you want the layers to fall. So these layers are going to fall like right about here. Now, she wanted longer layers, and I want to clean up here, so that's perfect for her. So I'm just going to cut straight across here. I'm going to bring my next section up to the top. follow my guide, cut straight across. And then I'm just gonna bring another section up. I don't think it's gonna make it all the way to the top, but I just wanna make sure that I'm covering all of my hair here. So no, it didn't make it all the way to the top. So I know that I'm not gonna bring any more hair up to the top. So that's just starting my initial layers. I'm just gonna grab these sides really quick, do the same thing, bring it up to my guide, cut those little guys off, and then this side as well. Make sure everything's nice and even, everything's nice and combed out. You're very organized in your haircut. Once I've got that, I've got my back layers all set. You can kind of see the little bit of layers. You still have your heavy baseline. You don't want to take too much away from that, because with Deborah, she does have thinner hair. So if I cut too many layers down here, she's gonna have a really thin baseline. And we don't want her layers to be too thick and then her have no hair down here. So we just wanna make sure that we're keeping our layers very nice and subtle for right now. I can always add more in there. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to take a mohawk section from the front. So I'm gonna release my front two sections, comb all my hair back, and start from the mohawk section. Making sure you get your guide in there, because that's going to be your starting point. Now when I do layers on the top of the head and in the front sections, I like to do them a little bit longer, because that gives me a little bit more room to play with the side sections. Like I was saying, you want to pick up some of your guide here, and then what I'm going to do, because if I were to cut it straight across here, follow my guide and cut all this hair off, that doesn't give me a lot of room to play in the front. It's going to give her very chunky layers. So in order to give myself more room to do what I want in the front of the head, depending on the thickness of their hair, the thinness of their hair, the texture of their hair, the density of their hair, I want to angle up. So I'm going to start with my guide. I've got my guide right here, I can see it, and I'm going to angle up to the front point by just trimming that piece, making sure you have nice tension on your hair. I'm going to cut all this at an angle. This is going to keep the front pieces longer, like I said, so that I can go in there later and do more of what I want to in the front. And kind of personalize the front depending on the type of hair that they have. So I'm just pulling my next section up from the side. I grabbed a little bit more hair from the side. I'm going to pull it up. And I'm going to follow that angle and my guide up to the front. There's not much to cut there. I'll try it with the next one, but I don't think there's going to be any hair to cut once I reach the top. No, there's my angle. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I like to shake her out just so I can see kind of where the layers are laying. So I can see kind of how it's falling, what I may want to do next. So I'm going to do the same thing over on this side, and I'm going to stand on the other side of the mannequin. It's just a little easier for me as far as where I'm angling my fingers. So I'm finding my guide. I still have part of my mohawk section that I brought up originally. Making sure your hair is really combed up, nothing is bent or anything. And then I'm going to bring it up to my guide and cut those little pieces there. Very important to not continue to cut your guide. If you continue to cut your guide, your whole haircut will be off, because you can cut more of your guide over here than you cut over here, then you don't have the same guide for the whole haircut, and then your haircut's going to be off. All right, so I'm going to repart her in the middle. And my next step to check her layers is I'm just gonna pull them directly out from the head. Now this is where I'm gonna get more personalized with my haircut depending on what type of hair they come in with. So I'm gonna start again at my guide, the top section that I started with the first time. And I'm just gonna comb it out directly from the head, pull it out, and you can kind of see that little mountain there. I'm just gonna cut that off. Now I'm not cutting a lot of hair off. You can also use this opportunity to point cut into the hair as well. If you feel like you want to add a little bit more blending, depending on what type of hair they have, you can point cut into the hair. Now, as you saw when I pulled that piece out, a lot of my base fell out. Again, very important to keep the thickness down at the base. Okay, so I'm going to, you can see that little mountain there. I'm just gonna point cut into her, just to kind of give her a little bit more blending. Now my last step that I'm gonna do as I am layering this is I'm gonna go to the bottom and bring it out. You're gonna follow the shape of the head. So see how my comb lays on the head? I'm gonna bring that section directly out from the head, okay? Again, this is very important. Keep your base, don't cut too much into that, but I just want to, I've been concentrating so far on this haircut on a lot of these layers, but I wanna blend them into my base without taking too much out of my base. So I'm gonna grab these layers and I'm just gonna cut ever so slightly into that. I didn't cut a lot off of that. I just kind of cut into this piece a little bit. So you're gonna be able to keep your base and create some nice layers to blend in this area. Because she has thinner hair, you have to be very careful that you don't cut too much out of the layers, or she will lose that thickness on the bottom. You can always do more after you style. I like to always do my initial haircut and then dry, see how it's laying, and maybe add a little bit more into it, because you can see it a lot better when it's dry. You can see maybe where one part's a little thicker than others when it's dry. You can see that a little bit better. So I'm just gonna go around the head and kind of do that with every section. I'm not cutting a lot off because I want to make sure she just wanted longer layers. So I want to make sure that I'm keeping the length of her layers. I'm not getting scissor happy and cutting into them too much. So this is my last section in the back. There's not too much to cut. You can see my guide here, and then there's not too much of a mountain here, so I don't need to cut that much off. If you don't see your guide, if you can't follow it, regroup and find it, because you don't want to just be willy-nilly cutting throughout the hair, because then you're gonna create not an even haircut. All right, now I finished the back of my head. And then I'm gonna move to the sides. I'm gonna do the same thing on the sides. Now remember, when we angled the hair up, when it falls, it's going to angle the hair down. So that gives me a little bit more room to play with my face frame, with how I want the layers to lay on the hair. Guests have a lot more hair in the back of their head than they do on the sides, because from here down, they don't have any hair laying. So you wanna make sure to keep that nice base so you don't cut a hole into their hair with the layers. And that's why I angle it up, to keep that really nice length in the front, so that when either right now before I dry her or after she's dry, I can go in and kind of personalize it a little bit. I do want her to have a little layer on the side, so I'm just gonna go in as I'm pulling it out from the head, and you can kind of see that little mountain there. That means she has a little bit more length in her layers. And I'm just gonna point cut into that a little bit. Again, not much, just a little bit. Now, when I'm pulling this section out, remembering that this is my base, okay? And I don't wanna cut into those lower layers, but I wanna add a little bit of layering here. Here's my base, and I just want to add a little bit of layering. So I'm going to point cut into that just ever so slightly. And you'll be surprised, cutting into it ever so slightly does make a big difference, especially when they have a little thinner hair like Deborah, or finer hair. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So when I shook her out, you can kind of see my layers starting to form down in through here. I would suggest during every haircut, shaking her out and just taking a moment to look at it, seeing where the layers lay, seeing how much base you have, instead of just going in and going through the motions. Really take a chance to stop, look at the haircut, see maybe where a little bit more needs to be cut, or a place you might want to avoid cutting into more. So I just cut off that little point that was there. And same here, remembering that this is all my base. I'm not going to cut that. And I'm just going to cut a little bit of layer into here. Just get those long pieces off. And then the front piece as well. Bring that up. Okay. Cut that a little bit. That little angle right there. Cut off. A little mountain. And then bring out the sides. Probably not going to cut a little bit. I'm not going to cut a lot off of that. But just kind of point cut into it. Just a teeny bit. Just to break up that little line. See that chunk there? I just want to break it up so it doesn't look so thick. Okay? And then, once I shook her out, you can see kind of where the layers are falling in her haircut. Now, I'm going to add a little face frame for her as my last step in this haircut. And in order to do that and make sure it's even on both sides, I'm going to slide cut down each side. I'm going to bring... Let's get her part really nice and even. Because she told me she usually parts her hair in the middle. So I'm going to get her nice even middle part. Figure out where you want your face frame to start. Does she want it to start from the chin? Does she want a big face frame? Does she just want like a really slight one? Wherever I figure out where I want her face frame to start, I'm going to start cutting that. I'm right-handed, so this is an easier side for me to cut as a face frame. I'm just going to add a little teeny face frame for her. So I'm just going to slide cut down her hair. And then check it. Make sure it's all looking good. And then, in order to even it up to the other side, I'm just going to take a smidge of that beginning face frame, and you can either go in like this and slide cut like this. You can stand behind them and come around the front and slide cut them. I personally like to go in from the front. You see my first guide. I'm just going to go in and slide cut down. Just a very simple face frame for Deborah today. Now, another thing you can do depending on the hair texture, if you dry it up or before you dry it up and you see that the layers are very chunky, like I can see kind of some places in here where I'd like to blend the layers a little bit. You can do that two ways. You can do it a little bit more, as like point cutting into it a little bit more, or I might take my texture shears and go through it and just texture the ends of her hair. Again, depending on her hair texture, whether she has medium, fine, textured hair, thick hair, coarse hair, whatever she has, you as a stylist decide what you want to do and how you want to blend. I'm going to blend her with my texture shears just because I want to show you how to do it. So I'm just going to take my texture shears and on the ends just lightly cut into it. Because she has finer hair, I'm not doing a lot. And that's just going to blend those layers in really nicely. So I'm just going to kind of go around her head and do that as well, where you kind of see the chunkier parts. When you bring it out, you can kind of texture in it a little bit. I also like to do this around the face as well. Kind of just around the face frame. If I feel like the face frame is looking too chunky, I do like to texture it just a little bit to lighten it up. So you can see that line there. I'm just gonna cut into it a smidge. Not a lot, because I know she has finer hair, just a smidge. All right, and then I dry her up and see how she looks, and probably go in and texture or point cut the layers, personalize it a little bit more as I see fit for her style.